She thought she was doing the right thing. After all, isn't that what everyone says? That moving into a nursing home is safer, easier, better for the kids, for herself. She had spent a lifetime making decisions for others, always putting her needs second. This one, she believed, was a decision for herself. A choice to rest, to be cared for, to not wake up in the middle of the night worried about the creek in the hallway or the garden overgrowing. She thought she was choosing peace. The place wasn't bad at first glance. Clean floors, smiling staff, structured days. Her children seemed reassured, too. They had their own families, jobs, routines. She didn't want to be a burden. That word echoed constantly in her head, burden. And this new place promised to lift that off everyone's shoulders. But it didn't take long before the illusion cracked. The first thing she noticed was how quiet everything was. Not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet. That kind of silence that feels like a vacuum pulling at your sense of being. Days started to blur. Meals arrived like clockwork, but they were impersonal. No favorite dishes. No warm smells drifting from the kitchen. Just trays. Processed food. A nutritionist's idea of good enough. She missed the sound of a boiling kettle, the clink of her spoon in a porcelain mug, the ritual of making something just the way she liked it. Then came the loneliness. You'd think, surrounded by people her age, she'd make friends easily. That's what they advertise: community, activities, bingo nights, shared laughter. But most of the residents kept to themselves. Some were too tired to speak. Others were too lost in their own pain to look up. Conversations, when they happened, were surface level, forced, and every now and then, someone just wasn't there anymore. Moved out, passed away, forgotten. No one really talked about it. Life just moved on, coldly and quietly. She began to feel invisible. Not in a dramatic way, but in the small things. Nurses would speak to her as if she were a child. People talked around her rather than to her. When her family visited, and they did visit, it was usually rushed. She'd try to share something, a feeling, a thought, but the visits were brief, full of updates and glances at the clock. They left with hugs and promises to come again soon. And she would wave, smile, and then return to the same sterile hallway, wondering when soon would be. There was also the schedule, the constant, relentless schedule. Wake up, breakfast, medication, sit in the common room, lunch, more pills, maybe a movie, dinner at 5:30, lights out early, no space for spontaneity, no room for her own rhythm. She used to spend nights reading, sometimes writing letters to herself. Now, if she kept her light on too long, someone would knock and remind her it was time to sleep. She felt caged not physically, but mentally. The routines that were meant to help made her feel like a piece in a machine. Predictable, managed, controlled. The lack of privacy hit hard. She had her own room, yes, but the staff came and went freely. For good reason, checkups, assistance, safety. But still, there was always someone knocking, entering, adjusting. She had nowhere that truly felt hers. No place to be vulnerable without interruption. She couldn't cry without someone asking if she was okay. She couldn't sing softly to herself like she used to in her garden. Even the bathroom didn't feel private anymore. Then there were the decisions, small, everyday choices that were no longer hers to make. What to eat, when to bathe, even what to wear sometimes. She used to take pride in little things like matching her scarf to her blouse, watering her plants every Tuesday, or watching the sunset from her porch. Those moments gave her life structure, meaning. Now, someone else decided when she showered, when she ate, even when she could go outside. And slowly, without her realizing it, she stopped deciding for herself. That was the hardest truth. Not loneliness, not the food, not even the lack of privacy, but the realization that she had traded independence for convenience. That she had let go of her freedom not because she had to, but because she believed she should. And in that quiet realization, Sitting alone by the window one morning, she said something she hadn't said before. "I regret this." That's where the story truly begins. Because regret, when it comes late in life, carries a different weight. It's not about fixing something, it's about understanding it. And there are 6 truths, hard and often hidden, that anyone considering a nursing home must know. 6 truths she wishes someone had told her before she signed the papers. Before she handed over her keys and walked into a world that promised safety, but at the cost of something deeper. Let's talk about the first truth. Hard truth 1. Safety isn't the same as living. She thought she was choosing safety. And to be fair, in many ways, she was. There were grab bars in the bathrooms, emergency call buttons in every room, nurses on site around the clock. No more worries about slipping in the bathtub or forgetting to lock the door. But what no one told her, what no one tells most people, is that safety can come at the cost of living. She used to walk around her neighborhood every morning. It wasn't far, just a couple blocks to the park and back. She'd wave at the same people every day, chat with the newspaper vendor, pick a flower or two from her tiny garden on the way in. She'd breathe in the air, even if it was humid or cold. She felt part of something. Even when she was alone, she was connected. But in the nursing home, walks were structured, monitored. You couldn't just step outside whenever you felt like it. Someone had to sign off. Sometimes they were too busy. Other times they simply said, "Maybe tomorrow." So she stayed inside. Day after day, the air she breathed came through a filter, the view from her window always the same, perfectly trimmed hedges and an artificial-looking patio. She was safe, yes, but she no longer felt alive. There's a kind of death that isn't physical. It creeps in when you're not challenged anymore, when you don't feel needed, when the small daily risks that made you are stripped away. She realized she hadn't laughed or really laughed in weeks. Because what was there to laugh about? Everything was designed to minimize disturbance. Calm, quiet, controlled. And over time, she forgot what it felt like to live without guardrails. Hard truth, too, you start to feel like a patient, not a person. It was subtle at first. The way staff addressed her, "Dear, sweetheart, honey," always in that soft, overly careful tone. The tone used with children or the sick. At first, it felt warm, familiar, but then it started to sting. She wasn't sick. She was aging, yes, but she could still think, still reason, still feel deeply. But in that place, she wasn't seen as someone with decades of experience, a full life behind her. She became a chart, a medication schedule, a bed number. Even the most well-meaning caregivers often overlooked the essence of who she was. The doctors visited quickly and spoke to others more than her. The staff administered pills without much explanation. They knocked politely but didn't always wait for an answer. It was as if her consent was assumed, because after all, she lived here. This was their system. She was just in it. She began to feel like her opinions didn't matter. Her body was being cared for, but her identity was fading. The woman who had raised children, managed a home, worked a job, read novels, traveled, that woman wasn't acknowledged. Just another elderly woman in a line of many. And slowly, she began to internalize that image. She started second-guessing herself. Should she speak up? Should she ask for help again, even if they seemed busy? Was she being difficult? Was she becoming that resident, the one people whispered about in staff lounges? That inner questioning became louder with each passing week. Hard truth 3. Family visits change, and not always for the better. This might be the hardest part to admit. When she first moved in, there were visits. Flowers, smiles, even laughter. Her children tried to make the transition easier. But life, as it does, got busy. The visits became less frequent. Calls turned into texts. Holidays were still observed, but always under time constraints. And she understood. She really did. She didn't hold anger, at least not at first. She told herself they were doing their best. And maybe they were. But deep down, the shift hurt. Because when you're not part of the family unit's daily rhythm anymore, you become a side note. They'd visit and talk about everything: work, school, the dog, the weather, but rarely asked her opinion about anything meaningful. No more questions like, "What do you think I should do?" or "Can you help me with this?" Those questions had dried up, because now she was the one being cared for, not the one giving care. The hardest moment came when one of her grandchildren said, innocently, "I wish you lived with us instead of here." The parents laughed it off, but she couldn't, because for a second, just a split second, she realized someone else could see her too. Someone still thought she belonged in a home, not just at one. And in that moment, a quiet grief washed over her. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a simple, piercing sense of being on the outside now. There are more truths, each one more painful than the last, but necessary. Because while she can't turn back time, you still can. If you're considering a nursing home, for yourself or for someone you love, understand the full reality, not just the polished brochures. Hard truth 4, the days start to blur and time loses its meaning. Before she moved in, her days had texture. Mornings were for coffee on the balcony, afternoons might be for tending to her small garden, evenings for favorite shows or rereading old letters tucked away in a drawer. Even on the quiet days, there was a sense of ownership. She decided what to do, when to do it, how to do it. That structure, built on her preferences and moods, gave her a sense of control. But inside the nursing home, everything followed a clock that wasn't hers. Wake-up calls came at the same time every day, whether she felt rested or not. Meals were served on schedule, regardless of hunger. Activities were arranged weekly: bingo on Wednesdays, music therapy on Fridays, movie night on Sunday, but none of it felt meaningful to her. It wasn't bad, per se, but it was empty, as though each event existed just to fill time, not to enrich it. She used to look forward to the changing seasons. Now, winter, spring, summer, fall, they all felt the same behind the same beige walls and artificial lighting. Even holidays lost their luster. They were marked by themed decorations and slightly varied menus, but not by joy. There was no anticipation, no build-up, just another day with a name tag. She once mentioned that time had started to feel mushy. That was the word she used, mushy. She didn't mean forgetfulness. She remembered everything, perhaps too much. What she meant was that the passage of time no longer had shape or rhythm. She would wake up and not remember if it was Monday or Saturday. And more importantly, she stopped caring. That was the scariest part. Because when someone stops caring what day it is, it means they've stopped expecting anything new to happen. That spark of possibility, the thing that keeps a person tethered to their own life story, starts to fade. And it wasn't because she was old or tired. It was because nothing in her environment made her feel alive. Hard truth 5, loss of purpose is the real pain. This truth didn't hit her all at once. It crept in slowly, in moments that didn't seem significant at the time. It was the absence of asking, "What do I need to do today?" No more grocery lists. No birthdays to plan. No one to cook for. No one to teach, to guide, to help. Those tiny roles she once took for granted, the ones that made her feel useful, were gone. And in their place was waiting. Waiting for meals. Waiting for checkups. Waiting for the nurse to refill her water. Waiting for someone to call. Waiting to feel needed again. She tried to participate in the community room. Once, she offered to help fold the laundry just to feel like she was doing something. The staff smiled kindly and said, "You don't have to worry about that, dear. Just relax." But she wanted to worry about it. She wanted to be asked, to be trusted with something again. We talk so much about keeping older people safe and healthy, but we don't talk nearly enough about giving them purpose. Without a reason to get up in the morning, even the healthiest person will begin to fade. And that's what she was starting to feel like she was fading into the background, no longer a participant in her own story. She wasn't depressed in the medical sense. She was empty. And there's a difference. Depression can often be treated. Emptiness? That comes from not being given the chance to matter. It got to a point where even when her family visited, she didn't have much to say. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't do anything anymore. "How was your week?" they'd ask. And she'd think, "What did I do this week?" She couldn't answer, because nothing had happened that she had chosen or shaped. She was alive, but no longer really living. Hard Truth 6. You can lose yourself without even realizing it. This truth is perhaps the most haunting of all. When she first arrived, she still dressed up, picked out earrings, styled her hair, wrote in her journal. But with each passing week, those habits slipped away. Not because she wasn't allowed to do them, but because no one noticed when she did. No compliments, no reactions, no one to say, "You look lovely today." And slowly, she stopped seeing the point. She stopped writing, stopped picking out her favorite cardigan, stopped asking for the book cart. Her favorite songs became background noise. Her old hobbies gathered dust. She had started this journey still full of personality, opinionated, curious, particular, but by the time a few months passed, she had quieted. Not because she wanted to, but because she felt like no one could see who she truly was anymore. She didn't become someone else. She just became less of herself. This isn't something you notice right away. It happens slowly, incrementally, and by the time she realized it, she was too tired to reverse it. She was surviving in a system built for safety, but not for soul. And as she once whispered in a moment of rare honesty, "I don't feel like me anymore." These truths aren't meant to scare you, but to prepare you. Because if she could go back and choose again, she might have fought harder for a different path. A more connected one. One where her voice mattered, her time had texture, and her purpose was still hers to define. The breaking point, when the walls close in. There was no dramatic moment of collapse. No sudden outburst. That's not how it usually happens in places like these. The breaking point for her came slowly on a day like any other. It wasn't a tragedy or a terrible incident. It was the exact sameness of the day that did it. Waking up to the sound of the hallway carts. Being handed the same breakfast she didn't ask for. The same polite nod from the nurse who'd forgotten her name again. The same TV show rerun playing too loud in the common room. She sat on her bed, staring out of the window at the parking lot. Cars came and went. Staff changed shifts. Families arrived with flowers or left in tears. But she just sat there, motionless. And then, in a whisper so faint she almost didn't hear herself say it, she murmured, "What am I even doing here?" It was the first time she'd truly questioned it aloud. And from that moment, she began to see it all differently. The polite smiles now felt hollow. The wellness checks felt like surveillance. The daily routines, meant to support her, began to feel like shackles. It was as if the veil had been lifted and she could finally see the life she had been handed and how far it was from the life she had chosen. She wasn't angry, not really. What she felt was deeper than that. It was grief. Grief for a version of herself that was slowly dissolving. Grief for the independence she gave away too soon. Grief for the conversations that would never happen, the holidays that would never feel like home again, the garden that no one was watering anymore. And no one really noticed. That was the part that hurt the most. Why no one talks about this regret? You might wonder, why don't we hear these stories more often? Why don't more people speak up about their regrets after moving into a nursing home? The answer is simple, because by the time most realize it, they're too far in. They don't want to upset their families. They don't want to be seen as ungrateful. And most of all, they don't want to admit that they made a mistake this late in life. A mistake that, in many cases, can't be easily reversed. She once said, "I didn't want to make anyone feel guilty. So I smiled through it." That's what so many do. They smile. They adapt. They find little ways to cope. And while some genuinely settle in and adjust, there are many more who feel just like she does, but have no one willing to listen. We glorify convenience. We worship safety. And we treat aging like a problem that needs managing, not a stage of life that still deserves meaning, freedom, and dignity. That's the lie at the heart of it all. That older adults are somehow better off being handled, contained, systemized. She regrets believing that lie. She regrets thinking that her comfort should come second to everyone else's convenience. And she regrets not asking the hard questions before making the move. What she wishes she had asked herself. If she could go back, she wouldn't just sign the paperwork and hope for the best. She would ask herself the things no one told her to consider. Not about the facility's cleanliness or their meal plans, but about her soul. Questions like, will I still feel seen, not just managed? Will I have a voice in how I spend my time? Will I have access to nature, to fresh air, to silence that belongs to me? Will I be able to choose what gives me purpose? Will I still be able to offer something to others, not just be taken care of? These are the questions she didn't ask, because she didn't know she was allowed to. No one prepares you for how subtle the loss of self can be. It doesn't come with alarms or warning signs. It arrives quietly, in the way people stop asking for your opinion, in how your schedule is set for you, in how your name is remembered only because it's on a clipboard. And she didn't realize how important those things were until they were gone. A quiet plea to those who are listening. She isn't bitter. She doesn't blame anyone. But if you're watching this, if you're someone making this decision for yourself or for a loved one, she hopes you take a moment to reflect. Really reflect. Not just on logistics, but on life itself. Because this story isn't meant to scare. It's meant to awaken. To remind us that aging doesn't mean disappearing. That care doesn't have to mean confinement. That safety, without purpose, becomes a prison with nice curtains. And most of all, that regret is a heavy thing to carry in your final years. She carries that regret quietly now. She folds it into her days like an old letter, but she shares her truth in the hopes that you don't have to carry the same weight. She didn't need perfection. She never expected luxury or constant entertainment. All she wanted, truly, was to still feel like she mattered, that her life was still hers. That growing old didn't mean handing over her identity in exchange for safety. And when I reflect on her story, I can't help but wonder, could things have been different? The answer is, yes, they could have, but only if people around her had known what questions to ask. If they had taken the time to truly understand what she valued, not just what she needed. Because there's a difference between care and connection, between structure and freedom, between surviving and living. One of the biggest mistakes is assuming that once someone reaches a certain age, they no longer crave independence. But the truth is, she didn't stop being her just because she turned 70 or 75 or 80. Her personality didn't retire. Her spirit didn't grow old. She still had stories to share, meals she loved, little quirks that made her unique. But over time, those things were flattened by routine, washed away in the system. If her family had known, they might have explored other options. Maybe they could have arranged for more in-home support. Maybe community centers, senior co-housing, or part-time caregivers could have kept her in her own space a little longer. Maybe someone would have noticed that she was still willing, desperate, even, to participate in life, not just be protected from it. But they didn't know, because no one told them what to look for, what to ask, what to guard against. And she didn't know how to say it, because she didn't want to seem ungrateful. That word lingered heavy in her throat every time she thought of speaking up. They're doing so much for me, she would say. I don't want to complain. But it wasn't complaining. It was truth. And the truth deserves to be heard. A message to families and caregivers. If you're watching this and you're making a decision for someone you love, pause. Think. Look beyond the brochures and the promises. Ask them not just what they need, but what they want. What makes them feel alive? What routines make them smile? What sounds make them feel at home? What activities light up their spirit, even just a little? And most importantly, how much of themselves are they willing to give up? Because what looks like a safe, practical solution on paper can turn out to be an emotional cage, one that's quiet, subtle, and irreversible. This isn't to say that all nursing homes are bad. Some are staffed with angels. Some residents do adjust and thrive. But the point is, this decision must never be made lightly, or quickly, or without listening, really listening, to the person it affects most. Ask them again, even if they say they're fine, even if they smile, even if they nod along. Sometimes the loudest cries are hidden in the softest silences. A message to seniors who still have a choice. And if you're someone who's aging, someone who might be considering this path for yourself, please don't ignore that little voice in your heart. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that says, I'm still here. I still have something to give. I still want to feel like me. Listen to it. Fight for it. Because while physical safety is important, your soul's safety matters just as much. You deserve to be more than managed. You deserve to be seen, heard, and understood. It's okay to ask for help, but don't hand over your entire life for it. Ask the hard questions. Make the uncomfortable choices. Speak up before the silence takes over. Because once you're inside the system, it's harder to find your way back out. And the longer you stay, the easier it is to forget who you were outside those walls. The final truth, regret doesn't yell. It whispers. She didn't scream her regrets. She whispered them between polite smiles and folded hands. In the way she hesitated before answering, I'm doing fine. In the way she lingered by the window, hoping to see a familiar face. In the way she clutched old letters, long after she'd read them 100 times. Her regret didn't explode. It settled. It seeped into her bones like cold air. And once it was there, it didn't leave. But she shared her story. Not for pity, not for sympathy, but as a warning. A quiet plea to those still on the edge of the same decision. Because once you move in, it's not always easy to move back out. And the cost isn't just financial, it's emotional. It's spiritual. It's the cost of fading while still alive. So, if you take nothing else from her story, take this. Ask more. Wait less. Listen deeper. And above all, don't mistake comfort for meaning. Your life, your identity, your essence, they don't expire with age. They need to be protected with the same care we use to protect bodies. Because a safe shell with a hollow soul is not a life well lived. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there is facing the same decision, and they deserve to hear what no brochure will ever tell them. Subscribe for more stories that speak the truth no one else will. And if you have a story of your own, leave a comment. Let someone else know they're not alone. You deserve a life that still feels like yours. Thank you for watching.